Hello, everybody. We have Dr. Mike BauerSchmidt with us. Mike has been treating patients, hundreds of them, since approximately 2015, almost a decade. So, I'm thankful to Mike for being here, and Mike's going to take you through his tour or his experience with LiveO2 and try to put it in context with hyperbaric. So, good morning, Mike.
Good morning. How are you, Mark?
Pretty good. So, if I remember correctly, you got your first LiveO2 back in 2015.
Yep,
and
right around there. And I actually had bought it for my personal use. And the reason I got it for my personal use was because I was suffering with a mold illness at the time. And my brain fog was so horrific that I would be sitting trying to talk to a patient, and I could not remember the last words that came out of my mouth. And then I had to look at the computer screen to see who it was I was talking to.
Wow.
And I swear to you, as God is my witness, after the fifth just LiveO2 treatment, my brain suddenly clicked on, and I went, whoa. Just the ability, and that's when I became fascinated by the technology. And I went out and bought Dr. Von Arden's book, Two-Stop Oxygen Therapy. Everything just made absolute sense. And as I became more involved with trying to get people detoxified and get them through the issues and the complications of being environmentally poisoned, it just became, the results I was getting were so dramatic and so profound. For the last 5 years, my practice has revolved around treating the sickest of the sick. People that have been to not less than 5, and usually around an average of 10 to 15 different ologists, rheumatologists, neurologists, psychologists, endocrinologists, cardiologists, pulmonologists, gastroenterologists, and nobody's been able to tell them what's wrong, which is part of the issue with our system. Is if we cannot give you a diagnosis, we cannot render a treatment. And the illness that we see as a result of environmental toxicity is such that it is multi-organ, multifactorial. Our success here is based on 2 premises. Premise number 1 is the diagnosis is not the disease. And number 2, it's always about everything. And if you do not deal with the total body burden of toxicity that we're exposed to on a daily basis, we're never going to get anywhere in the healing process. We'll just continue to chase our pharmaceutical tail if somebody can manage to put a label on what's wrong with us. When I started this idea of deeper healing, the big challenge was, how do we get rid of the toxins? Well, the hardest part of dumping a toxin is getting it out of the cell. And that's because of 2 things. And this is where Dr. Von Arden came in. He demonstrated that there was a physiologic switch at the end of the artery that entered the capillary. And that switch would open and close every few seconds to every few minutes. And if you think about it, it's really kind of necessary in order for our body to have time to exchange oxygen and nutrients across the cell membrane. Otherwise, if we didn't have that time, that little slight time lag, it'd be like trying to empty a freight train without stopping at the station. You'd dump a bunch of stuff out, but it wouldn't necessarily be enough of the right stuff. So that's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is that the toxins themselves interfere with our mitochondrial function. Well, the mitochondria are the engines for our cells. If our 6-cylinder engine's only running on 4 cylinders, we're not going to be very efficient in terms of burning the fuel. What makes us different as living beings is our ability to engage in aerobic metabolism. We use oxygen to amplify energy. We can take 1 molecule of glucose and turn it into 36 molecules of energy because of the magic of oxygen plus enzymes. Well, oxygen is carried primarily on the red blood cell. Link this back to the valve dysfunction that occurs as a result of the toxicity. The toxicity causes swelling at the end of that artery as it enters the capillary. So whatever is dissolved in the plasma can get through. But the red blood cells, even though they're very pliable and flexible, can't all manage to squeeze past that tight junction.
Mm-hmm.
So we've reduced the amount of oxygen that we can deliver to our cells to turn on the pumps to kick the toxins out. So what do? Well, you have to increase the oxygen saturation of the plasma, because the plasma can get in there. Mm-hmm. Whatever is dissolved in the plasma can get in there. And this is where I have a problem with folks that rely on supplements. And some of my compatriots say, oh, well, we're going to use a supplement instead of a medication and pat ourselves on the back about a job well done. Well, that's nice, except for the fact that you've gone from regular to premium fuel, but you haven't done anything about the damn spark plugs.
Right. Well, the fuel injector's clogged, or the air filter's clogged. And so if the cells can't get the oxygen, it doesn't matter what you mix in the fuel, or if the fuel's not getting there, it can't burn either way. Exactly.
So this is where the LiveO2 comes in, has been critical in the healing process for my patients. Simply because the combination of the altitude contrast with the increased heart rate. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. For you already know all this stuff.
Well, actually, let me kind of go back. So, I think the main things that, people come to LiveO2 confused about is, number one, well, why is this so much better than a hyperbaric? That's one dimension. And the second thing is why in the world would you want to use this adaptive contrast function, which is, it just makes no sense to me that using a low oxygen mixture would increase the oxygen delivery. So if you can help our audience understand that in your words and put that in context with respect to what you see with your patient, it would be really helpful for them.
Beautiful. Let me go through the LiveO2 sequence first, because this is really critical to understanding. The whole idea of the LiveO2 is we'll compare and contrast simultaneously. Hyperbaric chamber. Passive. You're just laying in the chamber. Somebody's controlling the oxygen concentration. Your heart rate doesn't go up. Your driving pulse pressure doesn't go up. Yes, you are getting extra oxygen. And yes, it can work to deliver more saturated, oxygen-saturated plasma to the cells. No doubt it can do that. Takes an hour and a half, kind of minimum if you're doing it right. And if you really want to do it effectively, you need a hard-sided chamber. Why? Because the soft-sided chambers can't get up much above 1.4, maybe 1.5 atmospheres, which basically is equivalent to 7 to 15. If you consider 33 feet of seawater as 1 atmosphere, the pressure change in 33 feet of water is 1 atmosphere. We're at 1 atmosphere at just standing on the face of the earth. So increasing it by 40%, you're only getting 40 to 50%. You're getting somewhere between 8 and 16 feet of seawater. So it's better, but is it really an efficient use or an effective use of your time? Contrast that with LiveO2. So what are we doing here? Well, we have you on 80% oxygen with a mask. We're starting to exercise you. So we're increasing your heart rate. That increase in heart rate starts increasing the driving pressure in your vascular system so that we can get to those areas that are damaged. If you got a stricture and a pipe, one way is increase the pressure to get more fluid through. Okay? So that driving head pressure becomes important. But on top of that, when you add the altitude contrast, so we got you all nice and saturated, and you're sitting there 2-3 minutes, breathing basically 80% oxygen and saturating the cells with a little bit of exercise. Then we take you to altitude. Well, now all of a sudden the body's going, wait a minute, I'm not getting enough oxygen to my muscles in order to, provide the oxygen I need to keep this exercise going. So what am I going to do? I'm going to increase my nitric oxide, and I'm going to dilate my blood vessels, and I'm going to increase my heart rate. Well, what's that do? That creates turbulent flow. Hopefully this is an analogy everybody can understand. Do you know the difference? There's a huge difference in the oxygen levels in a mountain stream versus a farm pond. Would you agree to that?
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? Because you have the turbulent flow. The water is crashing over the rocks and the surfaces, and you're getting more exposure of the blood the water to the air. Well, that same thing is happening in your vascular system. This turbulent flow is increasing the availability of the exposure of the red blood cells in the plasma to the oxygen in the lungs. And so when we take you there and we take you to altitude and we've increased your pulse rate and we've increased your nitric oxide concentration, we've created turbulent flow, then we give you the oxygen back. It's like, oh my God, somebody just rained manna from heaven in the middle of the desert and I'm going to eat up. And they're just like loaded up. And you can get, upwards of 600% increased concentration of plasma oxygen over what you would do just breathing 100% oxygen through a mask. That's pretty damned amazing. And I can do it in 15 minutes.
All right. Now, this is where we get into, the depth of your experience. So you've been working with patients many over years. So if you would help our audience try to understand what you see in terms of therapeutic velocity, how fast does LiVo2 work compared to hyperbaric, how many patients have you worked with, et cetera, because I think that's an important experience.
Yeah. I have worked with hundreds, if not by now thousands of patients with the system that I use. I can tell you, nobody has been harmed by oxygen. Everybody has been helped. Now, you mentioned the difference between, why don't I use hyperbarics? As well, because I can do in 15 minutes what it takes an hour and a half to do in a hyperbaric chamber. So it's effective in terms of how many people I can treat in the course of a day. It is far less expensive. If I was going to do hyperbarics, I'd have to have a hard-sided chamber. I just wouldn't settle for anything less. Which means that I've got to have somewhere upwards of $50,000 for the initial investment. Plus, I've got to have a full-time person to run the chamber that has to be trained in hyperbarics and management. That I'm only going to be able to do maybe 8 people a day. Not inconsequential, but far from cost effective. I have 2 of the 20-liter altitude contrast 2-person setups. I have 1 person that we have trained to run the exercise in 15-minute increments, and even allowing time to do vital signs and explain the other stuff that we do along with the LiVo2. I can realistically do 4 times that number in any given day. I can do 20, 30 people a day. How many more people am I helping? How much more cost effective is it? We're looking at a 40% or 60% off the cost of a used hard-sided chamber for a complete LiVo2 system, with extra left over to buy some extra masks. Some people prefer a treadmill. I have a treadmill. I have a couple of bikes. Bikes don't cost me anything other than the cost of the bike because it's self-powered. A little bit of electricity it costs me for the treadmill is not much. And then for the oxygen concentrators, it's just far, far, far more cost effective. And it works. I have had people literally that came in wheelchairs and said, well, how are you going to get them on a bike? Well, they can't, but I have a hand crank. You can use anything that you can do to increase the heart rate, you can use a LiVo2.
Well, one of the things that you said earlier, I think it'd be good. You said you've had people that have done 50, 60, HBOT dives.
Oh, yeah.
And, when you take them to LiVo2, how fast and the response. So, giving that feedback in terms of, it's takes less time, but is it more effective or whatever? So if you would please help our audience understand.
Far more effective. Yeah. And this actually goes back to von Arden's work. I've had people come in that have been the hyperbaric route and they say, I feel great for about a day or 2 after the hyperbarics, and then I start to crash again. They've done 40 to 60 treatments. From that, I do 10 to 12 of the LiVo2 sessions, and they are better and maintain it for time. And this is totally in keeping with von Arden's research. As we age, it makes it harder for us to exchange oxygen across the alveolar capillary membrane, because we get some thickening and just part of the natural, none of us is getting out of here alive process. Just with one treatment, it was able to take 10 years off that differential. And it would last for up to 6 months. And he found that with his two-step oxygen therapy, after 20 to 25 treatments, he would get a lasting effect. I'm finding it much quicker because of other things that I do along with the LiveO2 in terms of sauna and lymphatic drainage. Because, like I said, the biggest problem with getting the toxins out is getting them out of the cell. And you need oxygen to do that. Well, what do you do with them once they're out of the cell? Many of them are too large to be picked up by the venous side of the capillary bed. They have to be picked up by the lymphatics. Well, if you just dump a bunch of bacon grease down your kitchen sink and expect your sink to work, you're in for a rude surprise. So I always combine it with lymphatic drainage, but now so the lymph is carrying all this crud and corruption away back to our circulation, where now it's our responsibility for our liver and kidneys to handle it. But if I add the sauna, then I'm helping you eliminate it through sweat as well. And the combination has been very powerful. People get remarkably better after 10 to 12 treatments. I have people coming in for 2 weeks at a time from out of the state. And they will do LiveO2 Juvent sauna every day that they're here. There's other things we do along with it. But the cornerstone, the keystone, nobody gets out of here without doing the LiveO2. Just if you don't do that, you're just asking for failure. You got to have the oxygen. Oxygen is the healer. One fellow came in. He literally came in a wheelchair. Got him to start doing the hand crank and did the altitude contrast. He took a while longer, but he went from being in a wheelchair to driving his own car on his way to a new job in 12 weeks. I've had other people that have been sick for over 20 years. Literally half their lifetime or more. Get the oxygen going, get the toxins dumping, and they're not back to where they would like to be, but they see that they can get better. And this is where a lot of my folks, they get the literature out, and this is what you need to do at home. You don't come here and get emptied out and then just don't worry about it for the rest of your life. We are literally surrounded. I mean, we are awash in a sea of toxins. 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when I started this, there was something like 86,000 chemicals in production in the world. According to a Lancet article in 2018, there's now 112,000 chemicals in active production, 5,000 in heavy production, which means tens to hundreds of tons a year being produced. For every man, woman, and child in the United States, 500 pounds of chemicals are being produced on a daily basis, not to mention the toxic metals, the molds, and the EMFs.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I think, in terms of differentiating LiveO2 from, the hyperbaric is, as a physician, sending home and setting your patients up with the ability to take care of themselves for the long run.
Oh, yeah. And it's not just my patients, it's just anybody over the age of 40. I mean, you are building this, you've built this stuff, accumulated this stuff since you're a kid. And if you really want true longevity, if you want true efficient energy utility, oxygen is the key. 3 things that I would have: LiveO2, some form of lymphatic drainage, and a sauna. You do those 3 things, you're going to do so much for your longevity and your health overall that you cannot even come close to doing with home hyperbarics. Besides the fact that you've got to have 2 people to do hyperbarics appropriately, because you're going to be inside the thing, and somebody on the outside's got to run it.
Yeah, hyperbarics are not, very effective, or I'll call it appropriate for at-home use, just because of the self-administration. You got a footprint, exactly. You got to get inside, you got to, pressurize it, spend the time in and get out. It's just, the complexity where with what happens if something goes wrong while you're in the chamber? Right. You have to depressurize and exit. I mean, by comparison, my kids.
If you're even aware that there's a problem going on before it kills you.
Well, it's just to go back to the LiveO2 simplicity. My children have been self-administering LiveO2 since they were 10 years old. a 10-year-old, they hop on and they work out, et cetera. So I think the other thing, and this is a different question, which is, when your patients are on the mend, like with a lot of LiveO2 customers, we see they say, okay, I've got a health goal. I want to get over this problem. But what we see a lot is they transition from, okay, I'm over my health goal. Now I want to be an athlete. And they start pushing the limits in terms of, okay, well, I want to go do this, or they set a life goal that's got some physical demand to it. And so LiveO2 sort of silently transitions from a health recovery platform to a training platform. I
have the setup in the office at home as well. One of my technicians that runs my LiveO2 for me was saying that there's only been 2 people that have ever been able to suck the bag dry. I was one, and it was a professional hockey player was the other. I mean, he played for a national sports team. So he says, the only 2 people that ever suck the bag dry. So yeah, you can increase your vital capacity, your muscle capacity, and I think it has most often to do with increasing the number of mitochondria in your cells. You get to be more efficient at burning energy. I don't have any muscle biopsies to prove an increase in mitochondria, but I mean, that's the most reasonable explanation for why ongoing treatment or ongoing training with LiveO2 would be very beneficial.
Well, here's a question. People come to us, they say, well, what's it going to do for me? And you've observed this a lot. So I normally say, which is in terms of your functional age, and people starting today have a list of health issues.
Yeah.
Okay. And then if you take a look at that list of health issues and you put them on LiveO2 for 6 months, how many years in time will that list of health issues go back in time? What do you see with your patients?
Mark, I've got a different population. I've got the sickest of the sick coming in here, and they are thrilled if they see that they can have a better life than they have right now. Because so many of them are stuck in this idea that I'm never going to get better. I've been to all these doctors. Nobody's been able to help. What's this? What do you mean I'm going to get on a treadmill and breathe oxygen? Are you crazy? It's like I can barely stand up. And once they find out that not only can they stand on that treadmill, but they can actually become better, and even in 2 weeks, their capacity has improved significantly to where all they could do would leave here and go sit in the hotel room as they're out taking a walk, or they're going shopping, or they're enjoying some of the restaurants in town. And it's remarkable. I can't quantify in terms of age based on heart rate variability, or I'm not a study guy. I'm like, let's make you better kind of guy. If you're feeling better, I'm happy.
Well, here, let me hit you with another one that's interesting. A lot of people come to us and they ask the question. It's like, well, this adaptive contrast, this altitude, why would I want that? I'm not an athlete. And I know what I see, which is when I work with people having that adaptive switch, especially if they're exertion limited. So what's your experience in terms of working with people that are challenged with the adaptive contrast feature?
I've had people just kind of stand on my micro impact platform, breathe the oxygen and play with the altitude contrast to start. Just anything to get the body moving, even if it's a micro impact vertical compression sort of thing. Anything to get some body moving, gets the heart rate up a little bit. Anything that helps increase the turbulent flow is going to provide that pulse pressure differential that increases the oxygen saturation and increases the driving force. So many of our folks are clamped down on their vasculature. I mean, you hold their hands and you feel like they've just taken them out of the freezer. I mean, so much so that the pulse ox doesn't even register. It's like, no, this guy's dead. Okay. And just doing the adaptive contrast, even if they're not exercising vigorously, we're starting to oxygenate those tissues. And then when they start exercising, you get the real dramatic results, because then you've increased the pulse pressure and you're actually forcing that oxygen down into those restricted areas. You start that flushing thing, and I will warn people that are environmentally ill and have high body burden of toxins, when we start, I tell them when they come here for the first week, I say, you're not going to like me very much by the end of the first week. But by the end of the second week, you're going to think that, you're going to be thinking differently. And so there are things that you can do in addition to the LiveO2 to kind of prep the body to handle it. So we'll give people a binding agent, to help bind some of the stuff so it doesn't get re-released into the bloodstream. Before, when they get out of the sauna, we'll give them some vitamin C and an alkalizing agent to help replace the electrolytes and help keep things moving. Water is always encouraged. Niacin has been helpful in getting some initial vasodilatation to increase that turbulent flow a little bit more easily. So there are other little workarounds that you can do for the folks that just like, I can't even imagine walking to the end of the mailbox, much less 15 minutes on a treadmill or a bike. There are other things that we can do to help chemically imitate that, as well as do the altitude contrast. It's the contrast plus the heart rate that makes the difference. It gives you the differential between the atmospheric oxygen and the plasma dissolved oxygen. When you're at the altitude, and of course your body's hungry for more, you put a dry sponge in a bucket of water, it's going to fill up pretty quickly. You put a wet sponge in a bucket of water, it's not going to do as much.
Right.
The wet sponge in a bucket of water is a hyperbarics for me. The dry sponge in a bucket of water is the LiveO2 with the altitude contrast.
In terms of your own, response, I know you said your initial compelling issue was the brain fog. How do you personally feel your health fares after having been a 10-year user, 8 or 9 year user? I mean, your personal story.
I'm 69 years old. I'll be 70 in April. I have got the energy I had when I was 50, working ER, 12-hour shifts. I can't say I look the same as I did when I was 50. I sleep well. I eat well. I don't know where I would be. I know where I would be had I not found the LiveO2 back when I had the brain fog and the mold illness. I just wouldn't be here anymore. Quite frankly, it's as simple as that. I cannot imagine a single contraindication to using the LiveO2. I've used it for people in the acute concussion state. I've used it for people with help to assist them in their battle with cancer. I've used it for chemical sensitivities. The oxygen is the great healer. And without it, you're pushing the stone up the hill. And without it, I would not be anywhere near doing what I'm doing now. I would have been retired years ago. But I really enjoy what I do. And if there's two secrets to longevity, one is life, and the other is having a purpose for living it. Oxygen is life, and having a purpose to live your life are the two things that are going to be best suited to longevity and happiness, and LiveO2 provides one of them.